Hi, this is Phil Shapiro in Tacoma Park, Maryland. I've been reading a very powerful book. My grandfather would have shot me. A black woman discovers her family's Nazi past. So this has an unforgettable title to the book because it's an unforgettable story. So the story is a memoirs. It's not an autobiography, it's a memoirs of a journey that this woman, Jennifer Tiggy from Germany, she was born in 1970 to biracial parents, Nigerian and German. She was put up for adoption at a Catholic orphanage, and then she entered a foster family at the age of 3 and was adopted by the same family at the age of 7. And so here is the short version of her story, is that at the age of 38, it must have been about 2008, she was in the public library in Hamburg, Germany, and she happened upon a book that was a biography of her mother, who she knew, her natural mother, and the biography explained how her mother was the daughter of a Nazi commandant, a very famous, infamous, a very cruel human being who was the commandant of a concentration camp in Poland, a Nazi concentration camp. And so when she finds out about this book, kind of by accident, it sets her off into a tizzy, as it would anybody. And this book is the story of her journey of coming to terms with this family history, and in trying to engage in a lot of wondering about the nature of villainy and whether villainy might be inherited. So she had the blood of this man who was also featured in the movie Schindler's List, which she had already seen. And all of a sudden, she comes across this book, and this villain in a film was a real human being, is her grandfather. So it hit her over the head, and she, as anybody would, she sank into a depression and needed some therapy. She went to a therapist who referred her to another therapist. And let me just go through some quotes I got from the book. And this is the back cover of the book. I have entered a chamber of horrors. Slowly, I begin to grasp that the Amon Goethe in the film Schindler's List is not a fictional character, but a person who actually existed in flesh and blood, a man who killed people by the dozens, and what is more, who enjoyed it. My grandfather. I am the granddaughter of a mass murderer. So boy, that's a discovery to make. And that is one of the themes of the book, is that somebody ought to have told her this. It's unfair for her to have discovered this on her own, just casually. So this is a book about the harm of family secrets, the harm that family secrets can do, the very serious harm. So in the early pages of the book, in the prologue, this is just the beginning. I have to read it to you because it's quite fascinating. So here's the discovery of the book in the Hamburg Public Library. It is the look on the woman's face that seems familiar. I'm standing in the Central Library in Hamburg, and in my hands I'm holding a red book that I've just picked up from the shelf. The spine reads, I have to love my father, don't I? On the front cover is a small black and white photograph of a middle-aged woman. She looks deep in thought, and there's something strained and joyless about her. The corners of her mouth are turned down. She looks unhappy. I glance quickly at the subtitle of the book, The Life Story of Monica Goethe, daughter of the concentration camp commandant from Schindler's List. Monica Goethe, I know the name. It's my mother's name. My mother, who put me in an orphanage when I was little and whom I hadn't seen in many years. I was also called Goethe once. I was born with that name, wrote Jennifer Goethe on my first school books. It was my name until after I was adopted, when I took on the surname of my adopted parents. I was 7 years old. Why is my mother's name on this book? I'm staring at the cover. So this is the beginning of the story. What a story. So for 2 weeks after discovering the book, she is barely functional, as any one of us would have been. Any one of us would have been exactly that same kind of stunned. Stunned beyond words. I hardly leave the house. Sometimes I manage to pull on a pair of jeans instead of the usual sweatpants, but I'm soon overwhelmed by crushing tiredness and wondered why I bothered to shower and get dressed when I'm not going out anyway. My husband does his best to look after the children. And then she goes out for a run, I believe. Here's a little section, a quote I got from when she finds a therapist who has experience helping people who are found out that they have Nazi relatives. They have that kind of therapist in Germany who has that experience. So during the following weeks, I feel like I have been superficially restored to my usual self. Then at last, I have my appointment with the recommended therapist. His professor's office where we meet may be austere, but he understands my internal suffering. When he hears my story, he cries with me, and I feel safe. I feel in safe hands with him. My therapist will not cry with me again, but he will take good care of me in the coming months. I start running again. I've always enjoyed my own company, traveling alone, running. So that's there's interesting unstated messages about how physical exercise can help people who are living with depression. Can probably help all of us, right? Then another theme in the book is what is the nature of villainy? So these stories of how Amon Goethe considered himself superior, how he played music to accompany executions, used scarves and hats as props for his killing, how he played the master in his pathetic little villa. It would be comical if it wasn't so sad. He was a narcissist, but not just in the sense that he was in love with himself. He was a narcissist who felt on top of the world when he humiliated and degraded others. So there's lots of food for thought there. This book is a book of wonderings. It doesn't give answers, but it brings some wonderings to life that can benefit all of us. All of us don't have to go through the difficult journey that Jennifer Tighe underwent, but all of us can try and benefit from the journey that she has gone through, to think about some of these important issues of disclosure of family secrets, nature of villainy, mental health. Jennifer explains in the book that her brother was very supportive, and that her adoptive parents had no idea about any of this story. So she confronted her adoptive parents and says, "How come you didn't tell me?" And they said, "We had no idea. We had no idea about this." So, one other comment about this book that I found quite remarkable. I made it to the end of the book and then noticed that there was a translator of the book. So this book was written in German and then translated into English. And I'd say the translation is so superb. So the translator is Carolyn Sommer. This is from the end of the book. Born in Germany, she studied applied languages at universities in Germany, France, and the UK before settling in the UK in 1977. So top-notch marks to the translator and to the publisher who found a top-notch translator. There is a co-author of the book, Nicolas Selmayr, and the co-author at different points in the book, using a different font, takes the story from the first person to like a third person. And that is slightly confusing, but not confusing if you just pay attention to the font. There's a different font, and that shows the difference. So a very fascinating book, a book of wonderings. As I was reading the book, I did a lot of wondering, and I think I'm going to be doing a lot of wondering for the next while. And since I work at a public library, I'm going to be telling a lot of people about this book, and I hope that it provokes discussions in our community and in other communities. There's a lot of very interesting and important topics to think about from this book, and I commend the author for her courage in writing it. It must have taken some real courage to decide to sit down and write the story of a very difficult journey that she was forced to undertake. The book is about 225 pages in length. It's just the right length. Some passages are difficult to read. This is about some horrendous acts of war. So there are some stuff in this book that's difficult to read. But you know what? We ought to read them. You can't turn your eyes away from the stuff because you bury your head in the sand. And that doesn't do anybody any good. So even though some of the passages are difficult, we ought to be reading them. Thank you, Jennifer. You did good by writing this book. And thank you all, the publisher, for taking a risk. This is an international bestseller. It says at the top. This book has really caught on. Make sure your public library owns a copy. Make sure your high school, your college library, make sure they own a copy of this book. My grandfather would have shot me. A black woman discovers her family's Nazi past.